On New Year's Eve, my daughter-in-law calmly said, "We're going to put you in a nursing home. You're just too old now, and you're not of any use to us anymore." With a broken heart, I packed my bag and decided to run away. At the Greyhound station, I sat on a hard plastic chair and couldn't stop crying. A young woman walked up to me and asked if I was all right. I told her everything from the very beginning. She stepped aside, dialed a number, and said into the phone, "Dad, I found her." Yes, it was really her. I stood in the doorway of the room that had been considered my bedroom for 12 years, clutching an old floral suitcase in my hand. It smelled of mothballs and a life long gone. My hands were shaking, not from old age, even though I was already 75, but from the shock coursing through my body like electricity through frayed old wires. "We're going to send you to a senior living facility. You're getting too old, Martha. There's no point in you being here anymore." Those were the words Savannah, my daughter-in-law, had said just 30 minutes ago. She was pouring herself a glass of expensive champagne, getting ready for the New Year's Eve gala they were hosting, a party to which, as it turned out, no one had even thought to invite me. My son, Marcus, my only child, the boy I had raised alone after my husband's passing, stood behind her and stubbornly refused to meet my eyes. That silence hurt worse than any words could. "Mom, it'll be better this way, really," he muttered, staring down at the expensive Italian tile in the kitchen, the same tile I had helped pay for with the small inheritance I received after my parents passed away. "There will be people your age there, activities, hobby groups. It's a nice place, a premium facility." As if loneliness could be cured by a painting class and long hallways under buzzing fluorescent lights. I had moved in with them after my husband passed. Back then, Marcus insisted on it. "You shouldn't live alone, Mom. Come stay with us. We're family." That was before Savannah, before the big house in the gated community, before I became invisible to everyone. I cooked for them, watched the grandkids until the boys grew up, and started feeling embarrassed by their old-fashioned grandmother with her simple views and her church clothes that didn't fit their aesthetic. I cleaned, sorted, washed, and folded, trying to stay small and useful. I kept hoping that being useful would turn into belonging. It didn't. Now I was just old and useless, an obstacle taking up space in the guest suite that Savannah had long wanted to turn into her private meditation and yoga studio. The house was buzzing with preparations. Catering staff were scurrying through the kitchen. Florists in the living room were putting together grand arrangements. I hadn't been allowed in there for a long time. They were afraid I'd spill something or trip. For dinner, they brought me a sandwich on a paper plate. I ate it alone in my room, while downstairs they tasted appetizers whose names I couldn't even pronounce, giggling about how none of this was for someone with cafeteria tastes like mine. I looked around my 3 yards of personal space. There were photos on the nightstand. Marcus with a gap between his teeth at age 7, Marcus at his high school graduation, Marcus at his wedding. I was there in a dress Savannah had called tacky and dated, with a tone that made me realize she was ashamed of me, not the dress. On the bed lay a patchwork quilt my own mother had stitched. It was the only thing I stubbornly refused to give away or throw in the donation bin. "It's just junk, Mom," they'd say. On the chair was a stack of library books. I took them out a few at a time because I was too embarrassed to keep asking Savannah how to work their paid streaming subscriptions and smart TVs. That was how my last few years had gone. A small life, quiet, apologizing for its own existence, constantly waiting for something that was never going to happen. But there was one thing they had forgotten about. My parents' house. They had left me a small cottage in a town called Willow Creek, about 2 hours outside the city. It was a simple place, an old house where we used to spend our summers. I hadn't been back there since their funerals 8 years ago. The house was surely weathered by now, but it was mine. Marcus didn't know about it. I had never told him. Perhaps some deep-seated instinct had told me that something needed to remain mine alone, something that couldn't be optimized or turned into a studio. An hour ago, standing in the kitchen doorway and watching Savannah laugh with her friends while picking out paint colors for her future studio in the room where my things still sat, I decided I wasn't going to that nursing home. I would leave tonight before they could finalize the paperwork, sign something behind my back, and trade me in like an old cabinet that was too sentimental to throw out but too bulky to keep. My savings were modest. About $5,000 I had quietly tucked away in a separate account they knew nothing about. This money came from birthday gifts from my late sister and the tiny bits I managed to save from my Social Security checks before Marcus helped me with the bills. "Mom, why do you need to worry about this? Just relax," he'd say. It wasn't millions, but for me, it was a start. It was all I had. I packed quickly. A few clothes, my medication, basic necessities, my mother's quilt, family photos, and a small wooden box containing my wedding ring, old letters, and the last anniversary card from my husband, the one he gave me just before he died of a heart attack. Everything else could stay. Let Savannah have it. The hardest part was writing the note. I sat at the small desk by the window, listening to the champagne corks popping downstairs, trying to find words that weren't bitter. I failed. I wrote in shaky handwriting, "I won't be a burden anymore. Do not look for me. I hope your party is everything you wanted it to be. Love, Mom." I left the note on the bed and slipped out quietly while they were all in the backyard, looking at the fireworks setup and discussing how beautiful it would be when it all went off. No one noticed me slip through the front door. No one had noticed me for a long time. The bus station on New Year's Eve was almost empty. Most people were home with family, real family, the kind that actually wants you there. I sat on a hard plastic chair bolted to the floor, my suitcase at my feet, staring at the departure board. One bus was headed toward Willow Creek at 10:47. It was currently 9:15. The lights overhead hummed, making everything look pale and surreal. A man was stretched out across 3 seats near the vending machines, asleep. A young couple was quietly arguing in another language near the ticket counter, while I sat alone and watched the digital clock click away the minutes. Every minute took me further from the life I was used to, even though it had long stopped feeling like home. And then it hit me. The tears didn't come quietly and neatly like they do in the movies. They were huge, racking sobs, with ragged gasps for air and shaking shoulders. The crying felt like it was coming from deep inside, from the place where years of hurt, loneliness, and the feeling of being unwanted had built up. It came from the realization that the people you lived for, the ones you sacrificed everything for, could look at you and see nothing but an extra piece of furniture. That your son, your baby boy, the child you held in your arms through the night, fed with a spoon and nursed through fevers, could stand by and say nothing while his wife erased you from his life. I tried to cover my mouth with my hand to muffle the sound. Even now, even here, I was ashamed to take up space with my grief. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I lifted my head. Through the blur of tears, the world was a smear, but I could make out a young woman kneeling in front of me. She looked to be about 30. She had kind eyes and dark hair pulled back into a ponytail. Under her winter coat, I could see medical scrubs, a nurse or a paramedic maybe. "I'm fine," I forced out the automatic lie we all tell. "Just a long day." She didn't leave. "You don't look fine," she said softly. "Is there someone I can call? Family?" The word family made me let out a short, ragged laugh that sounded scary even to me. I shook my head. "No, there's no family left." She sat down next to me on the hard chair, not pulling away, not looking away, just making the air around me feel a little softer by her presence. "I'm Jasmine," she introduced herself. "I'm a good listener. If you want to talk, go ahead. I've got time. My bus isn't until 11. Maybe it was her kindness. Maybe it was the loneliness that had been building up for years. Maybe it was just that she was a stranger. And sometimes it's easier to tell the truth to strangers because they'll be gone tomorrow and you'll never see them again. I don't know. but I started talking. I told her everything about Marcus and Savannah, about how they told me on New Year's Eve that they were putting me in a home, about the party I wasn't invited to, about the guest room where I lived like a ghost. I told her about the separate plates, the separate meals, and how I was gradually pushed to the edges of my own life until I was just background noise. I told her about the house in Willow Creek and how at 75 I was running away like a schoolgirl because it was better than letting someone discard you like a broken washing machine. I told her about the note on the bed and the $5,000 that were supposed to be my new beginning. She listened and never once interrupted. At one point, her hand found mine and squeezed it tight. When I had finished, Jasmine took out her phone. "I need to make one call. Do you mind?" I nodded. I felt empty, wrung out like a rag. I didn't even have the energy to be curious. She stepped away a few paces, speaking quietly but urgently. I caught a few words. Found her. Yes, Dad, it's definitely her. Greyhound Station. Dad, you need to come right now. She came back and sat down, still not letting go of my hand. Help is on the way, she said gently. Just wait with me. Okay? I don't understand, I whispered. What help? You'll see, she smiled. There was something strange in that smile. Recognition, wonder, and absolute certainty. Mrs. Abernathy, you used to be a preschool teacher, didn't you? Or maybe kindergarten? The question caught me off guard. Yes, I nodded. For over 35 years. First in the nursery, then the early grades. How did you know? Did you ever have a student named Julian Halloway? The name floated up from my memory like dust motes in a sunbeam. Julian. I had seen thousands of children over the years, but that little boy with the huge dark eyes and a gaze so hungry for knowledge had always stayed in my heart. His parents were immigrants, working construction and cleaning jobs, taking whatever work they could find. They didn't have enough money or time. They were proud people who wouldn't take direct help. They were too shy for that. Their son would come to school in sneakers with holes in them, wearing a thin jacket that wasn't nearly warm enough for the winter walk to the classroom. I had bought him a warm coat from a thrift store back then, boots that actually fit, new notebooks, and pencils. I told his family it was a donation from the school administration, that there were extras left over because I knew they wouldn't accept charity face to face. I was just a teacher. I wasn't a wealthy woman. Every extra $50 was a sacrifice for me, too. No, a child shouldn't be cold. A child shouldn't be ashamed of his holy shoes. I never told anyone. I just did it because I couldn't do anything else. You remember, Jasmine said softly, searching my face. I remember Julian, I nodded. A very bright boy. He picked up everything so fast, but I don't understand what he has to do with this. He's my father, she whispered, her eyes shining. And he's been looking for you for 45 years. The station seemed to tilt. Reality shifted like the picture on an old television when the signal goes out. Jasmine's words hung between us, almost tangible. Your father? Julian Halloway is your father? Yes, she nodded, squeezing my hand harder. He talks about you all the time, about Mrs. Martha Abernathy, the teacher who changed his life. He tried to find you for years, but you moved after you retired, and the old school records were a mess. He hired private investigators, searched social media, asked everyone he knew, but there was nothing. And today, of all nights, on New Year's Eve, I find you right here. I shook my head. It was too much all at once. I didn't do anything special, I whispered. I just bought a little boy some boots and a coat, that's all. You did so much more. Jasmine's voice wavered. You made him feel seen. You made him feel like he mattered, that someone cared if he was cold or if he had notebooks. His parents were working 4 jobs back then, exhausted, and they still couldn't give him everything he needed. They were proud and scared, and you made him feel like he wasn't a mistake or a burden. Memories came flooding back, clearer than they had been in decades. Little Julian sitting in the reading corner, barefoot because his sneakers gave him blisters. The way he ate his small lunch, crumb by crumb, stretching out every bite while glancing at other kids' fuller plates. The way I started bringing an extra sandwich for him because I accidentally made too much. "Take it, Julian, otherwise it'll go to waste." The way he stood there, confused, looking at the warm coat I'd scavenged and whispering, "Thank you," not knowing what to do with his hands. "He worked so hard," I said softly. "I always thought if he just got a chance, he'd go far." "And he did." Jasmine smiled through her tears. "He got scholarships, went to college, then law school. Today he's one of the most prominent civil rights and family law attorneys in the state. He protects families just like his parents were, making sure they aren't cheated, making sure they have rights, and he always says it all started because one teacher showed him that there is kindness in the world, that you can just reach out and cover a stranger's child without expecting anything in return." I couldn't speak. There was a lump in my throat that wouldn't move. "He married my mom when he was 28, she continued. "She's a teacher, too. He always said that wasn't a coincidence. They had me and my brother, and my dad spent his whole life building our family so that we'd know we are seen, loved, and protected." Jasmine took out her phone, scrolled a few times, and turned the screen toward me. "Every year on the first day of school, Dad delivers boxes of shoes, coats, backpacks, notebooks, and pencils to schools and nurseries. For low-income families, for the ones who are too shy to ask. He does it anonymously. Do you know what he calls it?" On the screen was a photo of stacks of shoeboxes, neat rows of backpacks, and mountains of notebooks. "The Martha Abernathy Foundation," Jasmine said. "None of the parents know who that is. They just think it's a woman who helped a boy once, and now he's helping others." "In my honor?" I whispered. "For those boots?" "Not just for the boots," Jasmine shook her head. "For everything. For how you treated him. For believing in him. He dreamed of finding you his whole life just to say thank you. And tonight, on what seemed like the darkest night of your life, I sit down on a bus station bench, and there you are. When I told him I think I found you, he just went silent for a second and then said, 'Keep her there no matter what. I'm on my way.'" She took a breath and then became serious. "Only I have to warn you, Dad is very protective. When I told him how they treated you, what Savannah said, and how Marcus stayed silent, I've never heard him that angry." A flicker of anxiety stirred inside me. "I don't want revenge on anyone," I said softly. "I just wanted to go to my parents' house and live in peace." "Mrs. Abernathy, you deserve more than just peace," Jasmine replied firmly. "You deserve to be taken care of. And my dad has spent his whole life doing exactly that, helping people who are being pushed aside. Please, let him at least try to do for you what you once did for him." Before I could answer, the station doors swung open. A man walked in with a brisk pace. Not young anymore, with graying hair at his temples, but strong, tall, and well-dressed. He wore a dark, expensive suit and a long wool coat. He looked like a man who was used to moving forward and not stopping for obstacles. People stepped aside as he passed. His gaze swept across the room, past the sleeping man and the couple at the counter, and stopped on me. For a second, we just looked at each other across the cold, coffee-scented hall. Then he started walking toward me, faster and faster, and I found myself standing up from my chair. Suddenly, the years vanished. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, and his voice broke on my name. "Julian," I whispered. "Little Julian. Not so little anymore." He tried to smile, and in that smile I suddenly saw the same boy. The eyes were the same, the expression was the same, but the face was a man's. "Yes, it's me." He stopped right in front of me. A successful, confident man who could have been sitting in a warm room celebrating the new year with important people was standing in a drafty bus station, looking at me as if he were afraid I'd vanish. "I can't believe Jasmine actually found you," he said quietly. "All those years of searching, and here you are, at a bus station on New Year's Eve, running away from people who should have been carrying you in their arms. Those words, spoken out loud, finally broke something inside me. The tears started flowing again. Oh, Mrs. Abernathy. He stepped forward and very carefully, almost tentatively, pulled me into a hug. That's enough. No more running, especially not from this. I stood in his embrace. A stranger, a grown man whom I remembered as a little boy in shoes that were too small, was holding me so gently, as if I were made of glass. But there was more warmth in that hug than I had felt from my own family in years. Jasmine told me everything, he said, pulling back slightly, but keeping his hands on my shoulders. About your son, his wife, the nursing home, the note, the station, and the $5,000 you were going to start a new life with. I felt embarrassed. I'm sorry she dragged you away from your celebration for my problems, I muttered. I'm just a foolish old woman. I couldn't handle things. Stop. There was a steeliness in his voice that Jasmine had mentioned. Never say that again. You are not foolish. And you are certainly not a problem. You are the woman who once changed a boy's life, and he has spent his whole life dreaming of returning the favor. He reached into his inner pocket, pulled out a business card, and pressed it into my hand. It was thick cardstock with elegant embossing. It read, Julian Halloway, Senior Partner, Halloway and Associates, Family and Civil Law. This is who I became, he said softly, in large part because of who you were. I remember you, I replied quietly. The boy who always reached for books, who helped the other kids, and who never complained, even when it was obvious he was hurting and cold. You saw me, he said simply, Dad. In a world that pretended my parents and I didn't exist, you spent your own money, and I know now how little you had, just so I could have shoes and a coat. Do you know what that taught me? I shook my head. It taught me that I wasn't invisible, that even strangers are capable of kindness, that helping isn't a weakness or a mistake, it's a strength, that we don't have to live every man for himself. You planted a seed, Mrs. Abernathy, and my whole life grew from it. Jasmine stood beside him, and together they formed a solid wall in front of me. We're not letting you get on that bus, Jasmine said. We won't let you hide in a crumbling house just because it's easier for your son to get rid of you. I don't want to be an imposition, I tried to argue. You have your own lives, your own families. Imposition? Julian let out a short laugh, but there was a sharp edge to it. Mrs. Abernathy, I am a very wealthy man. I have connections, money, and resources. And all of it, if necessary, will be used to protect you. A shiver ran through me at his tone. It wasn't fear. It was the feeling that something massive had started moving and wouldn't be stopped. What are you going to do? I asked. He looked at me with an expression that was hard to decipher, resolve, righteous anger, and a warm, almost sun-like concern. For starters, he said, we're taking you out of here. You're coming home with us. Then we'll deal with the cottage in Willow Creek. We'll get it fixed up. And in the meantime, your relatives are going to find out what happens when you discard a person I love and to whom I owe everything. A flicker of my old, familiar fear stirred in my chest. I don't want a war, Julian. I just wanted peace. You'll get more than just peace, he replied calmly. You'll get protection. But before the peace comes, some people are going to have to hear that their actions have consequences. He held out his hand to me. Let's go, Mrs. Abernathy. There's still time before your bus leaves, but you won't be needing it anymore. I looked at the departure board where the Willow Creek bus was still listed, then at my old suitcase, and then at Jasmine and Julian, people I had helped by chance a lifetime ago. For some reason, they believed it was now their turn, and for the first time in a long time, the thought crossed my mind, maybe I really don't owe anyone anything anymore. I took his hand. We walked out of the Greyhound station together, me, Jasmine, and Julian, who kept his hand under my elbow as if he were afraid I'd change my mind and run back to the bus. Outside it was damp. The streetlights cast a yellow glow. A few cars hissed over the wet asphalt. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks were already going off. "The car is right here," Julian said. "Give me the suitcase. I'll carry it." I wanted to protest that I could do it myself, but he took the floral suitcase as naturally as if he'd been carrying my things his whole life. His car wasn't what I expected from a top-tier attorney. It wasn't a tank-like SUV or a flashy black limo, but a clean silver luxury sedan, elegant but not gaudy. In the back seat were 2 child car seats, and a small toy car lay on the floor. "Get in the back," he said. "Jasmine will sit with you." Jasmine settled in next to me, not letting go of my hand. Julian got behind the wheel, started the engine, and we drove away from the bus station into the city night, where people were already preparing for the midnight countdown. I watched the lights in the windows, the people setting tables and opening champagne, and I thought about how just 2 hours ago, I was certain I'd be spending New Year's alone in a cold station. "My wife Esther is going to cry when she sees you," Julian said suddenly, looking at the road. "I'm warning you now, she's very emotional." "Why would she cry?" I didn't understand. "I've been talking her ear off about my Mrs. Abernathy for years." He smiled, and Jasmine chuckled. "She knows every single story from my preschool days. To her, you're practically family, just a mythical one. Imagine a woman sitting at home and having a living legend brought to her door on New Year's Eve." I couldn't help a dry smirk. "A legend? I'm just a teacher who made pennies. An ordinary teacher doesn't spend her last few dollars to buy a child's shoes," he replied calmly. "And she doesn't bring him sandwiches because he's saving every bite." I felt flustered. It was so long ago, Julian. Honestly, I had stopped thinking about it. "But he didn't," Jasmine chimed in. "Not for a single day." The car glided smoothly through the night. Storefronts were glowing. Music was thumping somewhere. At an intersection, a group of people were laughing and opening champagne right on the sidewalk. "Tell me," Julian said after a few minutes, "how was it living with your son? Be honest." I sighed. I felt like I'd already told Jasmine everything at the station, but his gaze in the rearview mirror was attentive and non-judgmental, and the words started pouring out again, this time with different details. I told him how at first I had a proper guest room, but then it slowly got filled with extra boxes, gym bags, and kids' costumes until I had to squeeze sideways just to get to my bed. I told him how one night before the holidays they hosted a couples-only dinner and asked me not to be offended. "Mom, you understand." And I sat upstairs with a bowl of oatmeal, listening to the laughter and clinking glasses. I told him how Savannah just threw away my favorite cardigan, the one my mother had knitted while I was out of the house, because it ruined the aesthetic of the living room. "I found it later in a trash bag by the door," I said softly, "mixed with other old things to be discarded." Jasmine hissed through her teeth. "Enough, Jasmine." Julian gently checked her, but it was clear from his expression that he agreed with his daughter completely. I told him how the grandkids used to hang on my neck, but then they grew up and started rolling their eyes whenever I tried to hug them or ask about their day. How I ate separately, coming into the kitchen only at certain times so I wouldn't disrupt the flow of the house. And finally, how Savannah, without even putting down her champagne glass, announced the nursing home. And Marcus, I finished, just stood there looking at the floor. He didn't even try to object. He didn't say, "Mom is staying with us." He said nothing. Silence fell in the car. "Did you leave the note?" Julian asked. "Yes, I wrote that I wouldn't be a burden anymore and not to look for me." "You know," he exhaled, "if I could, I'd personally take that note and put it in the shredder. That's not who you are." "I'm already starting to regret it myself," I confessed. "But at the time, it felt like the only way." "Things are different now," he said. "Now you're not alone." We turned into a quiet, well-kept neighborhood. The houses were large but tasteful, manicured lawns, even driveways. Many houses still had their holiday lights on, and some had glowing reindeer in the yards. "We're here," Julian said. The house we stopped at was 2 stories, with warm yellow lights spilling from the windows. Neat steps led to the porch. Bushes lined with fairy lights twinkled. As soon as we stepped out of the car, the front door flew open. A woman about my age, with neatly styled gray hair and an apron over her house dress, ran out onto the porch. Her face was glowing, and her eyes were already wet. "Esther," Julian said, "this is Mrs. Martha Abernathy." She froze for just a second, looking at me, then ran down the steps and gave me a hug that felt like family. "Welcome home," she whispered in my ear. "Lord, finally." I was so caught off guard, I couldn't even answer right away. There was a lump in my throat again. A woman I had never met in my life was holding me with a warmth I hadn't felt from my own blood in more years than I could count. Come in," Esther said, pulling back but keeping her arm tucked into mine. "It's freezing out here, and you probably haven't had a real meal all day." Inside, the house was even cozier. Warm walls, soft lighting, photos on the shelves, Julian and Esther in their younger years, their kids, their grandkids, family vacations. In the corner of the living room, a decorated Christmas tree was still standing. Under it were gifts, neatly stacked. It smelled like a home. Not just clean, but like food, pine needles, warm bread, and life. "The guest room is all ready," Esther said. "Clean sheets, towels, everything you need. But first, to the kitchen. You're so thin. We need to get some food in you immediately." The kitchen was large, with a big wooden table, where it looked like half a regiment could gather. Esther sat me down on a soft chair against the wall, and she deftly pulled a large pot out of the oven. As she lifted the lid, the smell of savory beef stew filled the room. "This is Julian's favorite," she smiled. "Hearty, with vegetables and cornbread, just like it should be." A bowl of stew appeared in front of me, along with a plate of warm bread and a glass of iced tea. "Eat, please," Esther said almost strictly. "We'll talk afterward." I practically inhaled the first few spoonfuls before I realized how hungry I actually was. In my son's house, the food was always correct: salads, seeds, trendy grains. And there were always Savannah's quiet comments. "Mom, at your age, you really shouldn't eat heavy food." I had pretended I didn't remember sneaking cookies in my room at night, so my stomach wouldn't growl. Here, no one judged me for eating with an appetite. In fact, Esther kept offering more bread and asking if I wanted another glass of tea. "Now tell us everything from the beginning," she said once the bowl was empty. "How did you end up at that bus station?" And I told it, all of it, this time to the end. I told how I moved in with Marcus after my husband died, how at first there was a honeymoon phase, shared dinners, long talks, grandkids around, how I was gradually pushed aside, how I once overheard Marcus on the phone saying, "Yeah, Mom's living with us. It's complicated, but we're managing." As if I weren't a person, but some heavy cabinet that was a pity to throw out. I told about the separate plates, about how Savannah threw out my mother's cardigan, about the couples-only dinner while I sat upstairs. I told how the grandkids stopped coming into my room because Grandma's room smells like medicine and old stuff. About tonight, when Savannah informed me of the nursing home. "She said it," I added, as if she were talking about an old washing machine. "We'll toss this one, get a new one." Esther listened, frequently pressing her hand to her chest and occasionally touching my shoulder as if to make sure I was really there. Julian's face grew darker with every word. "And Marcus just stood there," he clarified. "Just stood there," I nodded, and said there would be activities for people my age. He didn't even sit next to me or take my hand. "And the money?" Julian asked, his voice steady but firm. "When you sold your parents' house years ago, how much did you give Marcus for their house?" I named the amount. I told him what Marcus had said back then. "It's a family home, Mom. We're all in this together. What does it matter whose name is on the deed?" I told him how Marcus took care of all the paperwork. "And where does your Social Security go?" he pushed. "To a joint account," I admitted. "I have a card, but Savannah mostly controls it. She says we have to make sure there aren't unnecessary expenses." "Can you withdraw whatever you want, whenever you want?" he asked. I thought about it. "Technically, yes. No, every time I bought something for myself, a new dress or a slightly more expensive shampoo, Savannah would sigh and talk about how we're supporting the whole family and need to save. I started feeling guilty for even wanting soap. If I'm honest, I said, I haven't touched it myself in a long time. Julian was silent, staring at the table. I see, he said finally. We'll deal with that too. I don't want him in jail, I said quickly. He's my son, no matter how wrong he was. No one is talking about jail yet, Esther intervened, her voice soft but firm. But you can't treat elderly parents like that. It's not right by human standards, and it's not right by the law. You need to understand, Martha, Julian added, that what they were doing could qualify as financial exploitation and psychological abuse. You have a right to know what's happening with your money and your life. I just don't want a war, I repeated. And there won't be one. He looked me straight in the eye. There will be a very clear conversation, but that's for later. Tonight, you're sleeping in a warm bed in a house where people actually want you. And tomorrow, we'll start thinking about how you're going to live from now on, so you never have to be at a bus station with a single suitcase again. Dad, Jasmine spoke up. She had been sitting quietly, leaning on the table. I already told the kids that Grandma Martha was found. They're coming over in the morning. They're going to have 1,000,000 questions. The kids? I was surprised. Our grandkids, Esther smiled. Jordan and Maya, they're 7 and 9. They already know all about you. Jasmine told them. Just a warning, they're curious. They'll have 1,000,000 questions. The idea that little children would be listening to stories tomorrow about some boy named Julian, whom I used to teach, felt both incredibly distant and somehow very warm. Now, to your room, Esther said, gently nudging me. You're exhausted. Your eyes aren't even glowing. They're just crying. The guest room looked like something out of a magazine. A large bed, white linens, a soft quilt, a lamp on the nightstand, an armchair in the corner, and in the bathroom, there were already folded towels, a new toothbrush, and soap. If you need anything, our bedroom is 2 doors down, Esther said. Don't hesitate for a second, Martha. You're not a visitor here. You're home. I nodded, not trusting my voice. When the door closed behind her, I sat on the edge of the bed, looked around, and caught sight of my old suitcase. It looked out of place in this bright, clean space. From downstairs, I could hear muffled voices. I could recognize Julian's confident tone, the one he probably used in court, and Esther's softer voice. Occasionally, a phone would ring. I couldn't hear the words, but I could feel it. He was already building something, making arrangements, starting processes I hadn't even considered. Somewhere on the other side of the city, in that big house with the Italian tile, Marcus and Savannah might not have even noticed I was gone yet. Or maybe they noticed and decided I'd just gone for a walk. Maybe they read the note, shrugged, and went back to their guests. I lay in the silence under the clean sheets, smelling lavender and freshness, and for the first time in years, I felt like a person again. Just a human being who had gone to sleep in a house where she was wanted. I didn't know then that in just a few days I would hear my son's voice sounding completely different, confused, angry, and scared, and I wouldn't be listening to him alone. I woke up to sunlight streaming in stripes across an unfamiliar ceiling. For a few seconds, I lay there not knowing where I was. I reached for the nightstand and then remembered, not the bus station, not the cramped room in my son's house, but the guest bedroom in a warm home where they had called me welcome. The clock showed 10 minutes to 9. I was surprised. In Marcus's house, I had long ago gotten used to waking up early, sneaking out to wash, sneaking back to hide while the family rushed around in the morning. Here, no one had woken me. There was a quiet knock on the door. Martha, are you awake? Esther's voice. Yes, I'm up, I called out. She walked in with a tray, coffee, toast with butter and jam, and some fruit. Happy New Year, Esther smiled. On days like this, decent people get breakfast in bed. You're spoiling me, I said, embarrassed. I can come down, really. I know you can, she waved it off. But today, I want it this way. She set the tray on my lap and sat on the chair by the window. "Julian's been on the phone since 7, she said quietly. "Last night, almost at midnight, he reached your son. He left a message, identified himself as your attorney, and said you were safe and under his protection." Everything inside me tightened. "Did Marcus call back?" "At 7:15, she nodded. "They're talking now. You can hear it in his voice. Your Marcus is in a panic." I picked up the cup, but my hand shook slightly. "I didn't want it to be like this." "I know," Esther said softly. "But you didn't start this circus with the nursing home, and you didn't let things get to the point where an attorney had to intervene." I stayed silent. "Finish your breakfast," she reminded me. "Then come down. The kids are waiting for you. They've been asking since sunrise to see the real Mrs. Martha." When she left, I turned on my phone. The screen lit up with dozens of notifications. 17 missed calls, 12 voicemails, and over 20 messages. The first ones were from Marcus, from late last night. "Mom, where are you? What is this note?" Then, "Mom, please call. We're worried." But after Julian left the voicemail, the tone changed sharply. "Mom, who is this lawyer? What does he think he's doing? Call me immediately." The messages from Savannah were short and cold. "This is all unnecessary drama. You're embarrassing Marcus in front of people. Even now, when they should be scared for me, her first priority is the embarrassment and what others will say." I didn't reply to any of it. I put the phone back down. I wasn't ready to be in a conversation with them yet, even through a screen. I got dressed, freshened up, and went downstairs. The house was full of life. Dishes were clinking in the kitchen, and kids were laughing in another room. The living room smelled of pine and something sweet. The first person to see me was a boy of about 9. "Is that her?" he whispered to Jasmine. "The real Mrs. Martha?" "That's her," Jasmine smiled. "This is Jordan." A younger girl with a bunch of clips in her hair ran out behind him. "Hello," Jordan said seriously, standing up straight like a soldier. "Dad says you're the kindest person in the world." "Oh, Jordan, I don't think so." I couldn't help but smile. "Your dad is definitely exaggerating." "Dad doesn't exaggerate," the little girl chimed in. "He's a lawyer. They aren't allowed to lie. I'm Maya." They huddled around me like curious kittens. "Is it true you bought Dad boots when he was little?" Maya asked. "It's true," I nodded. "But back then it seemed like such a small thing, I'd stopped even thinking about it." "It wasn't a small thing to Dad," Jordan said seriously. "He's told us that story 100 times." A strange feeling washed over me. I suddenly saw how my small act from back then was living right here, in this kitchen, in these children, in their words. "All right," Julian's voice boomed. "Give Grandma Martha some room to sit down before you smother her." He was sitting at the table in a casual t-shirt with a laptop and a stack of papers. He looked tired, but focused. "How are you?" he asked when I sat down. "I'm still trying to figure it out," I answered honestly. "But I think I'm alive." "That's a good start," he nodded. "Let's have some breakfast, and then we'll discuss the plan for the next few days." Breakfast was simple. Pancakes, syrup, fruit, and tea. The kids took turns asking about my teaching days and what their dad was like when he was little. I told them about the time he found a lost library book and walked blocks out of his way to return it, and how he used to help the other kids zip up their coats. Esther listened with an expression like she was watching a favorite old movie. "All right," Julian said at one point, setting aside his mug. "Grandkids, march to the living room. I'll put on a movie. I have an adult conversation with Mrs. Abernathy." The kids groaned but left. "So," he turned to me, "here's the plan. Today is New Year's Day. We won't rattle anyone too much. Tomorrow, if you don't mind, we're going to Willow Creek to look at your cottage." "It's probably falling apart," I sighed. "We'll see," he said calmly. "A contractor friend of mine, Silas, is coming with us. He'll give us an honest assessment. If the house can be fixed, we'll fix it. If not, we'll think about selling. The important thing is, this is your foundation. It's your resource that no one else knew about." "And Marcus?" I started. Marcus, he cut in gently, has already received his first warning. He didn't pick up last night, but he called back this morning. I told him you were safe and under my legal protection, and that conversations about nursing homes without your consent are over. I felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. What did he say? He mostly blustered, Julian smirked, tried to pretend you were just overreacting and that they only wanted what was best. I didn't push him too hard. I told him he'd receive a formal letter on Monday, and that's all for now. A letter? I tensed. Yes. On Monday, you'll come to my office and we'll talk. I'll show you the draft, and only when you approve will it be sent. It's going to be a full inquiry. Where did the money from your parents' house sale go? How is their house titled? Where were your Social Security checks going? I want a full accounting. Everything inside me tightened again. I don't want to cause them trouble. You aren't causing anything, he said firmly. You are just finally asking what is happening with your life and your money. They got used to your silence. They'll have to get used to something else. Esther nodded slightly, looking at me over her cup. Anyway, he continued more softly, until Monday we have 2 days. Let's focus on what matters to you and what you can touch, your house. The next day, the three of us, me, Julian, and Silas, were driving out toward Willow Creek. The highway was familiar. I used to drive it with my husband and Marcus when he was just a boy going to my parents' place. Fields, woods, and small clusters of houses passed by. The snow had melted in some places, leaving patches of gray. How long has it been? Asked Silas, a sturdy man in his 40s with the calm face of someone who has seen dozens of derelict houses. 8 years, I answered. After the funerals, I just didn't have the heart. I was always busy. Marcus, the kids, everything else. We'll see, he said. As long as the foundation and the roof are sound, everything else can be fixed. I nodded, though my heart was sinking. What if it was in ruins and my last hope turned to dust? Willow Creek met us just as it always had. A small community, old and new houses mixed together, a little general store, a bus stop. We pulled up to the familiar gate. I was almost afraid to get out of the car. The house didn't look as bad as I'd feared. The paint was peeling, the porch was sagging, and the windows definitely needed replacing. But the structure itself stood straight. The roof, though old, didn't have any obvious holes. Ha! Silas grunted appreciatively. It's a solid old house. I've seen much worse. We walked around the whole place and went inside. It smelled of dust and something old, but familiar. The floors creaked in places, and the wallpaper was bubbling. The wiring looked like a spider web. Look, Mrs. Abernathy, Silas said, jotting things down in a notebook. The walls are dry, the foundation is solid, the joists are good. We need to replace all the electric, the windows, the doors, and fix parts of the floor. New plumbing, and we need to think about a modern heating system. If we do it right, but without gold faucets, you're looking at about $40,000. If you want it to look like a magazine cover, maybe $80,000. My head spun at those numbers. I don't have that kind of money, I exhaled, even with what I saved. Mrs. Abernathy, Julian stepped in. We aren't at a store where they demand payment right now. Silas will draw up an estimate and break it down into phases. But more importantly, he looked at me intently. Let me invest in this. No, I said automatically. No, Julian, I can't take that kind of money. First of all, he began calmly, it's not a gift, it's an investment. Right now, this house is a weathered cottage. After renovation, it's a valuable piece of real estate. If you want to live here, you live here. If not, you sell it for a profit. And second? And second? I asked hollowly. Second, he smiled slightly. I've spent my whole life with the thought that one day I'd pay you back for those boots and that coat. With years of inflation and interest, believe me, $40,000 is barely half of what I owe you. I couldn't take it anymore and sat down on an old chair against the wall. I can't let you do this for me. And you already did it, he replied calmly. Years ago, you invested in a stranger's child. Now that child is grown and he wants to invest in you. It's a fair trade. I looked up at him. There was no pity in his eyes, no savior complex, just a warm, stubborn resolve. I'm going to do this anyway. All right, I surrendered quietly. Let's see the estimate. That's a deal, Silas said, satisfied. I'll send Julian a rough draft tonight, and you two can decide how fancy you want to get. We walked around the house a bit more. In my parents' old bedroom, I ran my hand over a windowsill Marcus had scratched with a toy car once. In the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of my mother's face as she stood by the stove. The place suddenly stopped being an abandoned shell and started coming back to life. On the way back to the city, I was quiet. "What are you thinking about?" Julian asked. "I'm thinking that I suddenly have a future," I answered honestly. My own corner, my own choice. I lived for so many years, as if there were no options, only what I was told. Now it's scary and exciting at the same time. "Scary is normal," he nodded. "You lived too long letting others decide for you. You got used to it. Now you have to remember that you're a grown woman." "At 75? I smirked. 75 is the perfect time," he replied without blinking. That evening, we sat in their kitchen. The kids were asleep. Esther was quietly doing something at the stove. Jasmine was scrolling through her phone. "Silas sent the preliminary estimate," Julian said, looking at his screen. "We'll talk about it tomorrow, but on Monday, Mrs. Abernathy—" He looked at me. "We start the second part." "What second part?" I asked, wary. "The legal part," he said calmly. "You'll come to my office. I'll show you the letter to Marcus and Savannah. Everything will be in there, the house, your contributions, and the attempt to force you into a facility without your consent." I felt a chill, even though the house was warm. "They're going to hate you." "Well," he shrugged, "I have plenty of clients as it is, but what they did to their own mother? I'm not obligated to like that." Esther turned around from the stove. "Main thing, Martha, remember, this isn't you going to war with them. This is you finally protecting yourself." I nodded, but I was still uneasy inside. Monday morning, I was sitting in a soft armchair in his office on the 15th floor of a glass skyscraper. On the desk in front of me was a thick envelope with the Halloway & Associates logo. It was addressed to Marcus and Savannah Vane. "Well, Mrs. Abernathy," Julian said, pushing the envelope closer. "Are you ready to read the letter after which there's no turning back?" I sat there and looked at the thick envelope like it was a live grenade. "I'll read it out loud first," Julian said. "If anything seems unnecessary or too harsh, we'll take it out. Nothing goes out without your approval." He pulled out several pages of thick, formal stationery. At the top was the list of partners, phone numbers, and emails. Just the look of it made me shiver. You couldn't just brush off a letter like this. "Dear Marcus and Savannah Vane," he began. He read in a steady, professional voice. The letter laid everything out under a microscope. That after my parents died, I sold their house and gave approximately $150,000 toward the down payment on the son's home. That the house was titled only in their names, and my ownership interest was never legally recorded. That my Social Security had been deposited into a joint account for years, to which I technically had access, but the expenses were actually managed by them. That I had been gradually isolated in the house, separate meals, restricted access to common areas, derogatory comments, and the attempt to force a relocation to a senior facility without my voluntary consent and without any official finding of incapacity. Then came the words that made my skin crawl. Signs of financial exploitation of an elderly relative, psychological abuse, and violation of a citizen's right to choose their place of residence. "In light of the above," Julian read, "we request a full accounting within 10 business days of the funds received from the sale of Martha Abernathy's parental home, as well as bank statements for the account where her Social Security was deposited for the last 3 years. We request a copy of the purchase agreement for your home and a title report to confirm whether the agreements regarding Martha Abernathy's share were honored." The end of the letter was even tougher. "Please be advised that Martha Abernathy is currently residing in a safe location, is self-sufficient, and is exercising her right to legal protection. Any attempts to exert pressure on her, to coerce her into decisions against her will, or to organize her relocation to elderly care facilities without due legal process will be documented and may result in a report to law enforcement and the courts. Please direct all contact through our office." He stopped, folded the papers, and looked at me. "Well, that's harsh," I exhaled. "It's honest," he corrected. "There isn't a single word in there that wasn't in your story." Still, I ran my finger along the edge of the desk. "It's terrifying." "What should be terrifying is what they were doing to you," he replied calmly. "This letter isn't an attack, it's a shield." He paused, then added, "By the way, speaking of shields..." He pulled out his phone. "Do you want to hear what Savannah has been texting you? I caught a few when you checked your phone this morning. You didn't even open the rest out of fear." "All right," I decided. "Read it." He scrolled and began. "This is all unnecessary drama. At your age, you should be grateful, not putting on a show. You're making Marcus look bad in front of everyone. Now, he looks like the son of a monstrous mother, and this lawyer is just using you. You're ridiculous with these claims. We only wanted to help, and you're betraying us." Every message was a tiny jab. Shame, guilt, hints that I was ungrateful, ridiculous, or selfish. "Classic," Julian commented calmly, turning the tables. "It's not their fault you ended up at a bus station. It's your fault it got to an attorney." "She was always good at using words to crush people," I whispered. "Marcus is good at it too, just softer," he noted. "Mom, you understand. All of this..." I leaned back in the chair. "I've spent my whole life afraid of being a bad mother," I confessed. "You aren't a bad mother for refusing to be a convenient victim," he said firmly. "You're just finally setting a boundary." He placed a pen in front of me. "Are we sending it? Or do you want to remove something?" I went through the letter in my mind one more time. Words like exploitation, pressure, violation of rights seemed too big, like an oversized coat. No, if I was being honest, wasn't that exactly what they had done to me? "Send it," I said. My voice was weaker than I wanted, but it was steady. "Excellent." He nodded and pressed a button on his intercom. "Natalie?" "Yes, Julian. The Vane letter is approved. Please send it certified mail by courier and email a copy as well." "On it," she replied. When he hung up, something inside me dropped. "That's it," I said softly. "No going back." "And thank God," he replied. "How many years did you spend pretending everything was fine just to avoid rocking the boat?" I didn't answer. He already knew. "Now, the important question," he continued, leaning across the desk. "What do you actually want in the end? Not from a legal standpoint, but just as a human being." I thought about it. The answer, "I want to go home," didn't sound the same anymore. That big house hadn't felt like home for a long time. "I want to know that no one can ever shove me into a nursing home again," I finally said. "I want to decide for myself where I live. I want my own money, not family money, so that if I buy myself a dress, I'm not asked if it's too expensive for a retiree." I took a deep breath. I want them to respect me, if they want to talk to me at all, and not just because they need something. "That's a great list," he approved. "We can make all of that happen." "And Marcus?" I faltered. "I don't know. He's my son. I love him." But when he stood there looking at the floor while his wife was discarding me, something in me died. "You don't forget that." "And you aren't obligated to," Julian said softly. "Is it even possible to go back to a normal relationship after this?" "Sometimes yes, sometimes no," he answered honestly. "But even if it's a yes, normal will be different. Not like before where you just take it. It'll be on new terms." He paused, then asked, "What's the scariest thing for you right now?" "That he'll hate me," I answered without hesitation. "That he'll say, 'You ruined our lives, Mom.'" "And is it scarier than going back to them and having it be the same, only worse?" he asked calmly. I shivered. "That's scarier," I whispered. "Then keep that in mind when the pressure, the tears, and the phone calls start," he said. "Now that they've received the letter, their first reaction will be panic and aggression. Then they'll try the guilt trip. 'How could you? We're family. You need to remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who don't push you out of their lives. I nodded. I'm glad you're here. That's all I can say. I'm not going anywhere, he smiled. I'm still your debtor, after all. We talked a bit more about practical things. He explained what documents they were required to provide, the deadlines, and what would happen if they ignored the letter. Don't worry, he added. I know this type of person. They'll consult their own lawyer, and any decent professional will tell them, don't fight this, give her the money, settle this amicably. Money, I exhaled. I'm not doing this for money. I know, he nodded. But the fact is, you put so much into their home and their lives, and it was never officially recorded. We have to fix that. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Yes, Natalie? You have a call on line 3, the secretary said. Marcus Vane says it's urgent regarding his mother. Julian raised an eyebrow at me, silently asking, Do we take it? My heart hammered in my throat. I nodded. He pressed the speakerphone button. This is Julian Halloway. Marcus's voice exploded into the room, sharp and loud. Where is my mother? I demand to speak with her immediately. Mr. Vane, Julian said evenly, as stated in the letter, all communication regarding your mother goes through me. Mrs. Abernathy is safe and, of her own volition, does not wish to speak with you at this time. Who the hell are you to tell me I can't talk to my own mother? Marcus snapped. You have no right to hide her from me. I am nobody to you, Julian replied calmly. But I am her attorney. I am not hiding her. I am enforcing her decision. She requested that everything go through me. This isn't hiding. It's protecting her boundaries. There was a pause on the other end. All that could be heard was Marcus's heavy breathing. Is she a prisoner there? He almost shouted. Did you brainwash her against her family? I can file a complaint if you're taking advantage of her age. Marcus, Julian cut in, and his voice turned icy. One more word about me taking advantage of an elderly person, and there will be a complaint, but it will be against you. You are on speakerphone, and everything you say can be recorded. Hear that? I nodded. I just want to talk to my mom, Marcus said, his tone dropping slightly. Is that too much to ask? The question isn't what you want, Julian snapped. The question is what she wants. For now, she wants to communicate through me. My heart was beating so hard, it felt like he could hear it through the phone. Mom? Are you there? Marcus suddenly asked in a completely different voice, shaky and confused. Mom, please say something. I looked at Julian. He gave a tiny nod. Speak if you want. I leaned closer to the microphone. I'm here, Marcus, I said softly. Mom! There was such a relieved sigh in his voice that everything inside me flinched. Mom, where are you? What is happening? Who are these lawyers? Why aren't you home? Because at home, I was told I was being sent to a nursing home, I replied, and everyone acted like that was normal. Mom, well that... He faltered. You misunderstood. We wanted what was best. It's a great facility. You stood there, I cut him off, while your wife said I was too old and useless, and you were silent. You didn't even look up. Silence followed. I didn't want to cause a scene in front of guests, he muttered. Savannah was out of line. I was going to talk to her later. Later? When I'd already been processed into a facility? I asked calmly. Without my consent? Without any discussion? You're dramatizing everything, Marcus exhaled. We just thought it would be better for you there. People your age, care, doctors. Did anyone ask me what I wanted? I interrupted again. Another pause. Mom, sometimes you get confused, he began tentatively. We thought it would be easier for you if... Marcus! My voice grew firmer on its own. I might forget where I put my glasses, but I know exactly where I live and what is being done to me. I'm not confused, and I never gave any consent to live in a nursing home. He let out a heavy breath. Fine, he surrendered. Maybe we rushed it. I admit we should have been softer, more careful. So, the only problem is how you told me, I clarified coldly. Not the fact that you decided for me how I'm going to live. Silence again. He started and stopped. Mom, just come home. Let's talk. Why all of this? Because, Julian intervened, for several years you managed her money, her house, and her life as if they were your property, and now Mrs. Abernathy has the right to ask where her funds went and why she was denied a voice. You shut your mouth, Marcus snapped. I'm talking to my mother. If you want to talk like a grown son, Julian said coldly, start by admitting what you did. And yes, from this point on, you are talking to me too, because all matters related to Mrs. Abernathy, legal and financial, now go through my office. Do you want to take our money? Marcus's voice had that familiar hysterical note I remembered from his childhood tantrums. Only now, he was a man. This is all about money. Yes, I want to, Julian replied calmly. Ensure that your mother has control over what she earned and invested. If everything is clean on your end, the financial accounting will simply prove that. This is blackmail, Marcus yelled. This is the law, Julian said. Tomorrow, you'll receive the formal letter. It's very clear. We need the purchase agreement for the house, bank statements, and title documents within 10 business days. Or what? Marcus asked viciously. Or, Julian said evenly, we will consider filing a lawsuit for the financial exploitation of an elderly relative. I shivered at those words, even though I knew that was exactly how he'd phrased it. Do you hear this, Mom? Marcus said, almost gasping. He's literally threatening us. He just wants to make money off of you. I closed my eyes and breathed. Marcus, I said tiredly, for the first time in years, I feel like someone is on my side. Not against you, but for me. Mom, how could you? His voice broke. I'm your son. Who is he? Some guy who popped up out of nowhere. He is the boy, I said softly, to whom I bought boots and a coat years ago so he wouldn't be cold. Do you remember the boy from the school I told you about? A heavy pause followed. And that boy, now a man, I continued, is treating me like a person, not like an old cabinet that's in the way of the new furniture. You're being unfair, Marcus said hollowly. We supported you for all those years. You lived with us, ate our food, we dealt with the kids, and you... Marcus, Julian interrupted calmly. That's exactly what the accounting is for, to see who was supporting whom and at whose expense. Everything is in the letter. I heard Marcus exhale sharply on the other end, as if he were trying to choke back a curse. Fine, he said after a pause. You want an accounting? You'll get your accounting. I'll find a lawyer just as good as you, and we'll see who was exploiting who. Excellent, Julian replied. A competent lawyer in your situation is the best advisor you could have. He'll be the first to tell you that you're coming very close to criminal charges. Mom, Marcus switched back to me. Do you really want all of this? The paperwork, the courts, this whole circus? I was silent for a long time. Everything inside me was fighting, the habit of smoothing things over, the fear, and the recent relief of having someone finally say no for me. I don't want a court case, I said honestly. I just want people to stop treating me like an object. Then come home, he almost begged. We'll discuss everything without strangers, without these... Home is where they don't want to throw you away, I said softly. Right now, home isn't there. The silence stretched on. Fine, he hissed finally. Do whatever you want, but when this lawyer uses you and dumps you, don't say I didn't warn you. And without waiting for an answer, he hung up. The office became so quiet, I could hear a secretary typing away in another room. I sat there staring at the desk, feeling my fingers tremble. Julian turned off the speakerphone, stayed silent for a moment, then stood up and sat in the chair next to me, not across from me. You did great, he said quietly. I know how hard it is to say no to someone close to you. He sounded so... I exhaled hoarsely, like I betrayed him. That's a favorite tactic, Julian sighed. You betrayed me because you wouldn't let me keep using you for free. It's in almost every case I handle. But you're his mother. I've spent my life afraid of being a bad mother. A bad mother is one who breaks her child, he said softly. You were breaking yourself for him. The question is, where does motherhood end and self-destruction begin? I covered my face with my hands. I still feel sorry for him, I admitted. He's there all alone in that house. He's not alone, Julian noted calmly. He has a wife, kids, a home, friends, and a job. He's a grown man, not a child. But who was sitting alone at a bus station with a single suitcase? That was you. The words hit the mark. I sat for a few moments until my breathing evened out. What now? I asked. Now we wait, he replied. They have 10 business days to respond. In the meantime, we're working on your cottage in Willow Creek, the renovation, the title work. You have your own separate account now, remember? I nodded. We had gone to the bank the day before to open an account in my name only. All your money goes in there, he continued. We'll move your Social Security there, too. No more joint accounts where you don't know where the money goes. And if... I swallowed. If he actually goes to court or starts a war? I'll handle him and his lawyer, he said confidently. Your job now is to learn how to live a new way. It feels like I'm learning to walk again, I tried to joke. Well, better late than never, he replied in the same tone. He was silent for a moment, then added, and remember one thing, Martha. Any concession you make for the sake of peace will be seen by them as a signal to keep pushing. So, no going back to them? No, he said. But going forward to a different relationship where you're respected? Theoretically, yes, if he grows up. I looked up at him. And if he doesn't? Then, he answered calmly, you'll have your house in Willow Creek, your own money, people who value you, and a life where you don't have to ask permission to breathe. A strange warmth spread through me. It wasn't quite joy yet, but it was something like hope. At that moment, the phone on his desk blinked again. A new notification. Julian glanced at the screen and smirked. Well, he said, it looks like your son has already made his first move after receiving the letter. I looked at him confused. An answer from their attorney just came in, he explained. Looks like we're about to see what they've been building behind your back all these years. 3 months had passed since that New Year's Eve, and sometimes I still had to pinch myself. I'd wake up and think it was all a dream. I was standing in the kitchen in Willow Creek, watching the morning sun lay stripes across the new white window frames. The house, which had recently been a weathered shell, was now polished and bright. The walls were freshly painted, the floors were level, and there was no draft anywhere. The kitchen had a real stove and oven, where the bread came out just like my mother's when I was a child. Silas and his crew had worked a miracle. It didn't smell like dust and dampness anymore. It smelled of wood, fresh paint, and something of my own. I ran my palm over the smooth windowsill. By that time, the renovation was already paid for, partly from the money that was returned to me, and partly from what Julian stubbornly called payment on the debt for the boots. I had resisted as much as I could, but he just smirked. If it wasn't for those boots and that coat, he'd say, there's a good chance Halloway and Associates wouldn't exist right now, so this is a pure business investment. I knew he was exaggerating, of course, but I didn't have the strength to argue anymore. Willow Creek had welcomed me back as if I'd never left. My neighbor, Mrs. Gladys Jenkins, 80-something years old, brought over pies and the latest gossip from day one. Who had passed, who got married, who moved to the city. When the local library found out I had spent my life working with children, the director, a young woman, almost cried with joy. You're a godsend. Come, read whatever you want to the kids and the adults. Now, twice a week, I sit there reading stories to the little ones and helping the school kids with their homework. I come home in the evening tired, but not from emptiness. It's a different kind of tired. On Sundays, Julian and his family come to visit. They bring jam, vegetables, and Esther always brings something delicious. The grandkids run around the garden, already talking about coming to Grandma Martha's place in the country. The first time I heard them call me Grandma Martha, I was taken aback, but then I got used to it. The phone vibrated on the table. A text from Esther. Sunday dinner at 4 sharp. Don't forget, Julian has news. News was a broad term these days. There had been plenty of it over the last 3 months. The biggest piece was that Marcus had finally provided the accounting Julian had been demanding. Through an attorney, of course, not directly. Bank statements, the purchase agreement, the title work. Everything I had never seen. It turned out exactly as we expected. My $150,000 from the sale of my parents' house had gone toward the down payment on their upscale home. My name was nowhere in the deed. The title listed only Marcus and Savannah. My Social Security had indeed been going into the joint account for years. Technically, I had a card. Practically 90% of it went toward their needs. Furniture for rooms I wasn't allowed in, vacations where I was an extra, and tutors for grandkids who ignored me. Julian had sighed after studying the papers. Classic textbook case. He wrote back through his attorney. Either they return my contribution with interest, or he files a lawsuit. 2 weeks later, almost $180,000 appeared in my new personal account. Marcus's lawyer sent a dry letter stating the Vane family considered the matter closed. No, sorry. No, we were wrong. They just transferred the money, and that was it. Marcus himself had tried to call and text. The messages were repetitive. You misunderstood everything. This lawyer is manipulating you. Come back. Let's settle this like family. Not once did he say I was wrong or I'm ashamed. I eventually replied once with a letter that Julian and I had struggled to draft, or rather, struggled to endure. I wrote, Marcus, you are my son, and I love you. That won't change, but loving you doesn't mean letting you treat me however you want. When you are ready to stop making excuses and admit what you did, to listen to me to the end without blaming others, then we can talk. For now, no. I need time and peace. I sent it, and it became quieter than it had been in years. Sometime later, Jasmine cautiously mentioned, without looking at me directly, that Savannah had filed for divorce. The house was put on the market. Marcus had moved into a rented apartment. Everything inside me tightened. On one hand, I felt sorry for him. On the other, deep down, I knew I hadn't destroyed their lives. They had built it that way. I picked up the phone to reply to Esther about dinner. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Usually, Gladys would just walk in without ringing. She had her own opinion on that. Why would I ring? I'm not a stranger. I wiped my hands on a towel, went to the hallway, unhooked the chain, and opened the door. Marcus was standing on the porch. I hadn't seen him in person once in those 3 months. Only his voice on the phone, and even then, only in that one conversation where he was shouting and I finally didn't give in. Now the man in front of me looked different. Thinner, haggard, with bags under his eyes. His hair was longer, and he hadn't shaved. His jacket was wrinkled, not his usual tailored suit and perfect tie. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. I held onto the doorframe to keep from swaying. "How did you find me?" was the first thing that came out. "Small town." He gave a crooked smirk. "Asked at the general store about the house with the recent renovation where the grandmother lives alone. They pointed the way." We stood for a few seconds, staring at each other. "Come in," I finally said. He walked in, took his shoes off carefully, as if he were afraid of scuffing the floor. He went into the kitchen and looked around. "It's nice," he said softly. "Feels like a real home, just like the one my grandparents had." "It is their home," I replied. "It just got old. Now it's been fixed up." We sat across from each other at the table. The kettle was still warm. I automatically turned it on. My hands were busy with mugs and sugar. Habit saves you when everything inside is turning over. "Do Esther and Julian know you're here?" I asked, just to say something. "No," he shook his head. "I didn't even tell them. To be honest," he smirked with a stranger's smile, I was sure that if I warned them, your lawyer wouldn't let me in here." I wanted to immediately object, that he doesn't decide for me, but I held back. "Why did you come, Marcus?" I asked directly. He swallowed. "Savannah's gone," he said. "She filed for divorce. We're selling the house. I'm living in a 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town." I stayed silent. "The boys," he faltered. "The oldest barely speaks to me. Do you know what he told me? A 17-year-old kid, my own son. He said, 'You threw Grandma out like trash. Why would I expect you to treat me any differently?'" Those words hit me as hard as they hit him. I sat there and realized, he continued, I don't even have an excuse. He's right. The kettle hissed. I got up, poured the water into the mugs, and set one in front of him. "And you decided to come to me because—" I let the sentence hang. "Because I realized," he exhaled, "that everything important I had, I threw away myself. My wife is gone. Fine, she's a stranger. We both failed. The kids are distant. That can still be fixed if I work at it. But you—" He looked away, then back at me. "You were the person who was always on my side, my whole life. From the first day I got sick, fell, failed, or fought, and I threw you out." He ran a hand over his face as if wiping something away. "I didn't come here to say it was all Savannah's fault," he continued. "Yes, she pushed. Yes, she wanted the house her way. But the last word was always mine. I allowed her to treat you that way. I personally drove you to the point where you had to flee on New Year's Eve." His voice wavered, but he didn't shout like he had on the phone. He spoke quietly, steadily. That made it even harder. "I took your money for the house," he went on, "and I didn't put your name on anything. I listened to Savannah complain about your sweater, and I said nothing. I saw you eating alone, and I thought, oh, it's easier for her. It was convenient for me, you understand? It was convenient not to notice." He looked at me like he did when he was a child, when he'd done something wrong and was waiting for me to either scold him or save him. "It was even convenient, honestly," he said, "that you agreed to the joint account. I didn't have to think about how you managed things. It was all under our control. And then one day I'm standing in the kitchen and my wife says, 'You're too old and useless,' and instead of throwing her out, I act like that's the way it should be." He paused for a second as if he couldn't continue. "You left," he said hoarsely. "Left the note. We came back from the party. The champagne was on the table, the guests were all dressed up, and you weren't there." I involuntarily tensed. Savannah read the note and said, "Well, fine. She left on her own. Fewer problems for us." And I— He gave a bitter smirk. I even managed to think in that moment, well, since she left on her own, it's not our fault. He lowered his head. "And then your lawyer called," he added. "And suddenly it turned out that all this time, it wasn't you living off of us. It was us living off of your money and your life." I said nothing. What could I say? "At first I was just angry," he confessed honestly. "At you, at this Holloway guy, at everyone. How could she? How does he dare? I'm her son. All of that." He smiled crookedly. Then I sat down with the paperwork and realized that if it went to court, I wouldn't just be scolded. It wouldn't be about disrespecting elders. It would be about specific legal violations. "You returned the money," I reminded him calmly. "Yes," he nodded. "But that, Mom, was the least I could do. In reality, it just kept the police out of it. But the rest remains." He took a deep breath. "I started seeing a therapist," he said quietly, staring into his mug. "Funny, right? A man nearly 50, smart, with a degree, having to go figure out why he acted like a complete coward. I didn't say anything. They told me straight out," he continued. "You chose comfort and your wife's opinion over the mother who raised you. You were more afraid of a conflict with Savannah than you were of losing your mom." He looked up. "And it's the truth. I hid behind phrases like, 'I don't want a scene,' and 'You know how she is, just be patient.' But in the end, I didn't hurt her. I hurt you." He went quiet, turning the mug in his hands. "I didn't come here to ask you to forget everything," Marcus said softly. "And I'm not asking you to act like it's all back to normal, Mom. I know things won't be like they were." He met my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, there was no irritation or fatigue in them, only raw fear and guilt. "I just needed to say it to you out loud. I was wrong. Not I was hasty or I worded it wrong, but specifically, I was wrong, cruel, and cowardly. And if you never forgive me for that," he swallowed, "I'll accept it." He went silent. The kitchen grew still. The tea had long gone cold. I sat across from my own son, who had suddenly realized everything. And I didn't know what was scarier, his previous indifference or this new painful honesty that I would have to deal with. I sat there in silence, and he did too. Only the clock on the wall ticked away. "I'm not expecting you to say, 'Oh, it's okay, son, let's forget it all.'" Marcus was the first to speak again. "I know it doesn't work that way." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "I took a job at a regular high school," he said suddenly, "teaching math to seniors. The pay is a joke compared to the office, and it's a struggle to get used to it. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something real. I walk into the room, and there are kids who don't care how much I make or what my suit looks like. They just care if I explained the lesson well or not." I couldn't help a faint smile. "Changed professions then," I said. "Well, finally something good." He looked at me. "That's thanks to you. I remembered how you always said a teacher is someone who can change a child's life. Back then it used to annoy me. Now I see it for myself." He was silent for a moment, then added, "And I go to therapy once a week. We're figuring out how I managed to go so far, why I always chose silence at any price, silence at the expense of others." I looked at him intently. Not a boy, not my baby boy, but a man who was finally, honestly digging into himself instead of hiding behind excuses. "Marcus," I said calmly, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forget that kitchen. How you stood there staring at the floor and I had only one thought in my head. So this is it." "Me too," he whispered. "I still see your back as you walked away, and the fact that I did nothing." We fell silent. "What do you want from me now?" I asked directly. "Honestly." He lowered his head. "I want to be able to come visit you sometimes, to sit, to have tea so you can be a tiny bit in my life again. Not as a housekeeper or a nanny, but as a mother, I guess." He looked up. "I'm not asking you to move back in with me. I couldn't even look you in the eye every day in that house. Besides, that house is gone. I thought about it, weighing it. "Look," I said, "I am not going back to the way things were, under any circumstances. I have a home, I have my own life, and my own people. I will never live where I am tolerated again." He nodded. "But," I paused, "if you really want to fix things, and not just drown out your own guilt, then we can try. No promises." He froze. "Coming over for tea? We can do that," I said. "Once every 2 weeks or so, without the 'I need you' for this urgency. Not to talk about grudges, but about how you're living and how I'm living, so we don't feel like total strangers." I took a deep breath. "But Marcus, remember this. One disrespectful word, one attempt to pretend I don't exist, and that's it. I won't give you a second chance at this. I have a life now where I am seen. I will protect that." He nodded quickly, several times. "I understand," he exhaled. "And Mom," he stopped, making an effort. "Thank you for even giving me a chance." "I'm not doing it for you," I answered honestly. "I'm doing it for myself, so I don't have to wonder later. What if he could have changed, and I didn't even try?" He smirked in his old way. "Familiar, my therapist says the same thing, that chances aren't a gift to someone else, but a way for you to live in peace." We sat for a bit longer, talking about small things. How the boys were doing in school, how he liked teaching, how I liked the library and the kids. The conversation was uneven, sometimes empty, but it didn't have that old chill where every word had to be weighed to avoid an explosion. Then he stood up. "I'm going to go," he said. "I don't want to overstay my welcome the first time." At the door, he stopped. "Can I hug you, or is it too soon?" I thought for a second and nodded. He hugged me cautiously, as if I were made of glass. Not a son hugging out of habit, but a man who understood he hadn't earned that hug yet. He was asking for it. "I'm really going to try, Mom," he whispered. "Don't try for me," I replied. "Try for yourself, but it'll make me feel better if you succeed." He left. I closed the door, leaned my back against it, and just stood there for a long time. It didn't feel lighter or heavier. It felt honest. Half an hour later, I called Julian. "Well," I heard his voice. "I had a feeling something would happen today." "He was here," I said. "Marcus came over, alone. No Savannah, no lawyers, no ego." "And?" he asked seriously. I told him almost everything. The words, the therapy, the school, the way he looked me in the eye, and the fact that he didn't ask to be excused, but only to be heard. "And what did you decide?" he asked. "I decided I'd try to communicate with him a little bit," I said. "But I'm living here." "That's the most important part," he replied with satisfaction. "When a person has their own home and their own boundaries, everything else can be figured out." He was silent for a moment. "How do you feel? Not about him, but about yourself?" I looked around. My renovated home, the flower pots on the windowsill, the quilt Esther had given me on the chair. On the fridge, a drawing by Jordan and Maya. Grandma Martha and our dad when he was a kid. "Honestly?" I asked. "Honestly," he confirmed. "I hope," I said cautiously. "I'm sad for what Marcus and I lost, and I'm grateful for what I found." "Sounds like a diagnosis, alive," he chuckled softly. "That's exactly what it is," I answered. "I'm alive. I'm not an attachment to someone else's life or a side note to someone else's status. I'm living my own life, Julian." "Mrs. Abernathy," he said after a pause, "remember when you said at the bus station that an old person isn't needed by anyone?" "I remember," I sighed. "Well," his voice grew serious, "an old person who doesn't value themselves isn't needed by anyone, but one who stands up for themselves. They're very much needed, at the very least to themselves, and usually the rest of the world finds a way to value them too." I smirked. "A philosopher, aren't you?" "That's how you raised me," he replied calmly. We talked for a bit more about the house, the library, and the grandkids. At the end, he suddenly said, "By the way, New Year's is coming around again soon, the real one." I looked out the window. In the garden, the flower beds were already green, and the apple tree was starting to bloom. "My New Year already happened," I replied, "back when I didn't get on that bus." "I agree," he said, "but happy new life anyway, Mrs. Abernathy." "You too, Julian," I said softly, to the boy in the boots who grew up to be a shield for others. He laughed. We said our goodbyes, and I was left in the house alone. No, this alone wasn't scary anymore. It was mine. Since then, more time has passed. Marcus and I really do meet up sometimes. Either he comes to me, or we go into the city, just to sit in a cafe. Sometimes he manages to keep it together. Sometimes he slips into old habits. "You understand, Mom, I mean, don't start." Then I calmly remind him that I have my own house in Willow Creek, and people who treat me without all those "you understands." He scowls, then exhales and rephrases. He's learning. I'm learning too. Not to grab at every crumb of his attention like it's a gift, but to watch how his actions, not his words, change over time. Sometimes the grandsons come over. The oldest held a grudge for a long time, but seeing his father honestly admit his mistakes was probably a lesson for him too. They go places together now, the gym, games, or out to my place. I sit and listen to them on the porch arguing about some sports stat, and I think that sometimes our children teach us much more than we teach them. Julian and his family are still my favorite weekend visitors. They come over, bring new seedlings, and laugh. Esther scolds me if I work too hard in the garden. Sometimes, when the three of us, me, Julian, and Marcus, end up at the same table, I see how Marcus gets flustered. It's not easy sitting next to the man who saw you when you were 5 in holy shoes and who understands how you could have turned into the man who sent his mother to a nursing home. But you know what? Let him feel a little ashamed in the presence of people like that. It's better than him thinking he can get away with anything. Shame is a useful feeling sometimes. The moral, no matter how you look at it, is simple. A son isn't a god, and a mother isn't a saint. We are who we are, living, tired, and flawed. Love doesn't mean you have no boundaries, and even at 75 you can say, "You can't treat me like this," and not die from it, but actually start living. And you never know how far a small, kind act will go. A pair of boots and a warm coat bought from a teacher's salary 40 years ago came back to me in the form of an attorney who picked me up from a bus station and put me back on my feet. Life doesn't always work out that way. Often it doesn't. But one thing I know for sure, if you spend your whole life carrying everyone else and forgetting yourself, eventually you'll become unnecessary, even to yourself. No one will save you until you stand up for yourself. Friends, if you were in my place that New Year's Eve, would you have left the house or stayed for the sake of peace? How would you have handled your son afterward? Would you have given him a chance or cut him off forever? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for listening to my story until the end.